The sword will never depart from your house." Nathan the prophet wrote that curse in the marrow of King David's lineage. But the kingdom never expected the sword to take this form. A son of David's own flesh. A man so flawless, the scriptures say there was no blemish from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. His name was Absalom, the Golden Prince. He was a masterpiece of skin and bone, standing in shimmering gold against the gray, unforgiving walls of Jerusalem. Yet, even in his perfection, there was a hint of the burden to come. He possessed a magnificent mane of hair, a heavy crown he cut only once a year when its weight became a literal encumbrance. It was his pride, his signature, a symbol of a prince who had never been denied. But beauty is often a thin veil for a rot that began with a sickening hunger in the palace halls. Before the first drop of blood was shed, a sister's innocence was slaughtered in a shuttered room. Amnon, David's firstborn and heir, looked upon his half-sister Tamar and saw not a sibling to protect, but a prize to devour. Following the very crafty counsel of his cousin Jonadab, Amnon feigned illness to lure Tamar into his quarters. There, amidst the scent of baking bread, the mask fell. Tamar's pleas for honor were silenced by a strength never meant to be used against one's own blood. He violated her, and then, in a spasm of sudden loathing, threw her out like a broken vessel, bolting the door against her cry. Tamar did not just walk away. She staggered into a ghosthood. She shredded her royal robe of many colors and smeared the gray filth of ashes across her forehead, the universal sigil of a broken thing. She walked through the streets of Jerusalem wailing with a sound that should have split the stones of the palace. Yet when she reached the threshold of her brother Absalom, the sound was stifled. Absalom looked upon his sister's ruin with eyes that did not weep. He saw the bruises and the ash, but offered only an icy restraint. "Has Amnon your brother been with you? Now hold your peace, my sister. Do not take this thing to heart." It was not comfort, it was a gag. He was clearing the stage for a darker play. While Tamar sat as a desolate shadow in Absalom's house, news of the outrage reached King David. The scriptures say he was very angry, but he remained paralyzed. The palace became a tomb of unspoken words. David failed to punish Amnon, perhaps because the ghost of his own sin with Bathsheba made him a captive to his son's depravity. The king's silence was a second violation, whispering to Absalom that in this kingdom, royal blood was a shield against the law. For 2 full years, the palace was held in a tension so thick it felt like a physical weight. Absalom was not forgetting. He was perfecting. He was a predator who knew that revenge is best served when the vintage has peaked. The season of sheep shearing finally arrived at Baal Hazor. Absalom donned the mask of the dutiful son and invited the king and his brothers to the festivities. When the king declined, Absalom specifically requested the company of Amnon. As the sun dipped low and the hearts of the princes were merry with wine, Absalom's hidden servants struck. In one sudden horrific motion, the silver of the blades flashed against the flickering torchlight. The white wool of the shearing floor was painted in a violent, spreading crimson. Amnon fell amidst the spilled wine, his life pouring out before his terrified brothers. The feast turned into a slaughterhouse, and Absalom fled into exile in Geshur. For 3 years, Absalom sat in a pagan court, staring back toward the hills of Judah. In Jerusalem, King David's fury was slowly eroded by the relentless tide of a father's longing. Joab, the king's pragmatic commander, recognized this paralysis and used a wise woman from Tekoa to trick David into allowing Absalom's return. But David's mercy was fractured. He permitted the return, but decreed, "He must not see my face." For 2 more years, Absalom lived in Jerusalem as a ghost in a golden cage, his love curdling into a structured resentment. When a formal meeting was finally granted, David pressed a hollow kiss to his son's cheek, a gesture that touched the skin but left the soul in a chasm of fire. Absalom walked away from that embrace, not as a son restored, but as a predator unleashed. He had seen the king was weary, his hands heavy with the blood of old wars. Absalom began to build a stage for the theft of the crown. He acquired a chariot of shimmering bronze and 50 men to run before him, a moving wall of heraldry. Every morning he stood at the city gate. When a citizen approached with a grievance, Absalom would reach out, pull them into a false embrace, and murmur, "Your claims are good, but there is no one appointed by the king to hear you. If only I were judge." With every handshake and kiss bestowed upon a beggar, he stole the hearts of the men of Israel, one by one, until the king sat in a palace of ghosts. The wind changed in Jerusalem long before the trumpet sounded. A messenger arrived at the palace, his eyes wide with terror. "The hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom." In that moment, the giant slayer felt the earth give way. David, the warrior king who had never retreated from a Philistine phalanx, made a decision that curdled the air. "Arise and let us flee." This was a humiliation. David descended from the city he bought with blood, crossing the brook Kidron like a beggar. He went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives, weeping, his head covered and his feet bare. He was a fugitive from his own seed, stripped of sovereignty by the son he had once kissed in forgiveness. Behind him, Absalom ascended the heights of the palace to fulfill a terrible, looming prophecy. At his side stood Ahithophel, whose counsel was a serrated blade. "Go into your father's concubines," Ahithophel urged, "that all Israel may hear you have become a stench to your father." On the roof of the palace, the very same stones where David had once looked down upon Bathsheba, a tent was pitched. Under the blinding glare of the Judean sun, for all the city to see, Absalom defiled the 10 women David had left to keep the house. Nathan's ancient curse echoed through the snapping of the tent's canvas. "I will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor." Absalom did more than commit a crime. He declared David dead while he still breathed. The final collision moved to the suffocating green shadows of the Forest of Ephraim. Absalom marched with a sea of untested men, seduced by his promises. Facing them were David's mighty men, iron-willed survivors of 100 skirmishes. As the armies collided, the very earth turned against the usurper. The forest, dense and treacherous, devoured more people that day than the sword. Thickets became snares, and the canopy choked the light, turning the battlefield into a labyrinth of screaming men. The Prince of Beauty, realizing the tide had turned, swung his mule to flee. As he galloped under the spreading arms of a great oak, the irony of heaven struck. His hair, that heavy 5-pound mane he had so meticulously groomed as the symbol of his unmatched glory, became his executioner. It tangled in the gnarled fingers of the oak. The mule, unthinking and indifferent to royal blood, kept running, leaving the prince suspended between heaven and earth. He was caught in the in-between, too high for the earth to claim him, too stained for heaven to receive him. He hung there, shimmering like a broken jewel in the thicket, his pride literally anchoring him to his doom. A soldier found him but refused to strike, remembering David's plea. "Deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom." But Joab, the captain of the host, was a man of iron. He saw not a son, but a cancer. Joab took 3 javelins and thrust them into the heart of the suspended prince. Joab's 10 armor-bearers then surrounded the dying man and finished the work. They did not carry his body back for a royal funeral. They threw the once flawless remains into a deep, jagged pit in the woods and piled a great heap of stones over it, a cairn of shame for a man who had wanted a monument of gold. The dust of the forest settled, but the air above Jerusalem remained heavy. King David sat between the gates, his soul narrowed to one question: is the young man Absalom safe? When the messenger finally spoke the truth of the prince's death, the victory of Israel died in David's mouth. The king did not stand as a sovereign. He collapsed as a father. He retreated to the chamber over the gate, his footsteps heavy on the stone, and released a wail that has echoed through the centuries. "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I have died instead of you?" The rebellion was over, and the crown was secure. But in the king's valley, the marble pillar Absalom had built to preserve his name stood in chilling, empty silence. While the people in the forest piled jagged rocks over a broken body, the valley monument remained a hollow testament to the bankruptcy of ambition. David remained in the gatehouse, a broken old man mourning a golden prince who had traded a father's love for a cold stone legacy. In the shadows of the palace, the sword sat unsheathed, its work finished on one generation, waiting for the pride of the next.